The table saw is extremely difficult for penguins to use because penguins have short arms. Actually, penguins don't use power tools at all because they're penguins. Table saw is used primarily in this class for cutting wood to width, or cutting with the grain. It's basically the opposite of the chop saw. It's got to be treated with respect. There's been a ton of accidents which have occurred on the table saw. Parts of the table saw: you have the guard and the blade, the fence, the table, the on and off switch, and the blade height adjuster. Sort of under the table on the right, you have another knob that adjusts the angle of the blade. In this class, the blade's always going to be 90 degrees. The rules are simple. The wood, just like everything else, has to be at least 12 inches long, and the guard always has to be in place. It's only used for cutting with the grain, or cutting to width. The jointed side of the wood goes against the fence. The fence always has to be locked down. The fence slides from right to left, and then you lock it down when you get it to the right measurement. The blade can't be any higher than 1/4 of an inch. You don't want the blade like 2 inches above your wood. You could just cut your finger off. Don't want that. You always have to use a push stick. You always stand slightly to the left when you're feeding that through. That way, if a kickback occurs, it doesn't hit you. It just goes right past you. And somebody always has to stand on the other side and catch the wood as it comes out of the table saw. So right now, let's take a look at the table saw in action.
Teacher Joe Early. Joe, thanks for joining us. Thank you, homeboy.
Well, I see you've brought some equipment with you today. Would you mind giving us a little demonstration?
Not at all. There's only a few simple principles you must bear in mind before attempting to operate a sophisticated piece of machinery like this
Table saw.
sometimes when my students
Okay, that was just a joke.
Make
That
a
was
rib
from the
cut
movie
safely
UHF.
today. We're going to use the table saw to make this cut, and I'm going to show that rib cut here in a moment. But I just want to go through a couple of the safety features real quick and just kind of familiarize you with the saw and how to be safe using it. Okay, so we'll just glance at the saw here for a moment. I'll show you a couple of the parts. Now, first off, we're going to be making a rib cut down this board, and a rib cut's always going to be with the grain. So the table saw is usually the tool that we're going to make a rib cut with. Occasionally we'll use a bandsaw or something else, but for the most part we're going to make that rib cut on the table saw. The table saw is a tool that needs to have a guide for it, and so in this case we're going to use this piece right here, which is called a fence, and we'll use that fence to be our guide. So that will give us a nice parallel cut with this side of the board. So on this rib cut, we'll set up the fence and it will guide us across the cut here. Okay? Now when we set up for this cut, first thing we have to do, as always, is set the blade up. What we prefer is to have it one tooth higher than the wood. That way it prevents the wood from, if the wood raises a little bit, it will still cut all the way through. But at the same time, it keeps the blade fairly low so that our chance of running our hand across it is also low. Okay? So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to shave a tiny little bit off of this. So I'll set up the fence to do that, and then I lock it down into place. I have my blade height cut, or blade height set. I'm going to lower my guard. Whenever possible, we want that guard to be in place. Now I'm going to be using something else. This is called a push stick, and what this will do is it'll guide it. And whenever my hand's going to be close to the blade, I prefer to use this push stick. With the push stick, just keep a little bit of space between the fence, and then you're going to want to squeeze it and hold it down. Now as I cut this board, my left hand is going to plant right here on the table saw, and it's not going to move. I don't want to have any forward pressure because I don't want to push my hand into the blade ever. Just in case this jars, I don't want to be shoved into the blade. So my hand just plants, and it does two things. My finger holds it tight against the fence, my thumb holds it tight against the table saw. And then I'll transition to the push stick later. Right now my eyeball should be right along this fence line here, because the most important thing is to keep this flat against the fence. If it was to guide away from the fence that way or this way, what will happen is the board will bind in the blade and come kicking back on you. And in a worst case scenario, it drags your hand right across the blade. and it'll happen so fast you can't react to it, so you have to be prepared for it. So I'm going to make a cut here and show you what it looks like. Just going to guide this through. All the way through the blade.
Okay, so that was the table saw. You can see he used a push stick. You couldn't see him stand slightly to the side, and you couldn't see that he had somebody on the other side catching him. But that's what it's all about. You're going to have a test on this. You got to pass that test with at least a 95%. Let me know if you got any questions.